Should we start from the beginning of the album, or should we... Do you know if there is any direction that makes more sense? Like, or if we should start with the lyrics I wrote and then yours, since you have more on this album?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
So, in this video we're talking about our first album, which looks like this. It might look similar to you, and to some not. And if you want one of these, you can comment and we'll share a link where they will be available for you to give away or forget somewhere. One doesn't exclude the other. I made plenty of them, so they are meant to be shared, and that's what I intend to do with them. And hopefully you can spread that along. So there are many reasons why I think this title makes sense. Out of all projects that I have, it made sense that we would choose this title for our first album, and to make an album instead of an EP as a statement that it's something different and something more. And that's why our album is called This Is Not Lifelover, because we will always be life lovers, but at the same time we never really were.
It's funny.
It's all about context.
Yeah, I think it's funny because to some extent everything creative we will ever do will in some extent be compared to Lifelover, or people will have Lifelover in mind when they think about.
And no matter what we do,
exactly.
Even if we were still making a Lifelover, they would still say this is not Lifelover for
exactly
some obvious reasons and some other.
Yeah.
But no, you can see that with all artists, that no matter what you do, some of you will always want something else, and that's fine. That's how we are as species. We're always yearning for something, and when you put the responsibility of delivering that in the hands of someone else, there will be, of course, limitations.
Yeah.
So it's also a statement in that this is not Lifelover, and that is of course an obvious statement because we are Ritualmord. But at the same time, it's an album that in many ways there are lyrics on this album that I had actually written for the next Lifelover album that never happened, and they would never fit in any other project. But with Ritualmord we have a similar kind of way of phrasing and exploring ideas and concepts compared to what I would do with Cal or Hypothermia. And my other solo projects are mainly instrumental, so it makes a lot of sense to have a place for these kinds of concepts in this album. And as an example, the last song on this album, called Totalitär Tomhet, is Totalitarian Emptiness. It's a song I wrote as a joke for Niklas Kvarfort, because he had made several lyrics on his earlier albums about emptiness and total fucking emptiness and so on. And we were talking one day and he felt like, yeah, that puts the end to those kinds of titles. And I like to challenge people, so my instinct is of course to not agree but counteract and say, yeah, well, how about totalitarian ambulance? And of course he had already made up his mind that he wouldn't make more songs on that theme, but I felt like, well, Lifelover can't. And then the Lifelover ended, but we didn't. So that is kind of the origin story of that lyric, and it's about solitude and the kind of feelings you have when you're just exploring emptiness.
Do you remember when you wrote it?
It was one of my times being alone at home in my apartment that some years later burned down.
Yeah.
Fortunately after I moved from it, but still sad because I really liked that house. It symbolizes a certain part of my development as a person and as an artist, and a lot more. But it's also the last place I moved while Lifelover existed.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of memories connected to that, because me and Jonas used to have a lot of calls during the nights. Like we would take walks together and just talk. And this is one of those lyrics that it was between one of my nights hanging out with Niklas and one of my nights visiting Jonas in Stockholm after he had moved back here from Strömstad. And it was just being in between strong emotions.
Yeah.
And I had these ideas and some of these sentences in this lyric that I needed to find a place for, and then I wrote the rest of it around it, because of course the title is an excuse to use that title in the song and then expand upon it.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of the story around that. And then my other lyric on this album, Stoner Pop, it was originally intended for Cal, but it's a bit too like the self-distance that you need to have to make a song that fits with that kind of lyric is not the kind of material that we usually do with Cal.
Yeah.
It's a bit, because Cal has a very specific kind of vision and style that we usually strive for, but it's a bit harder and heavier and slower.
Yeah.
While that song requires almost something a bit more pop-like or progressive or psychedelic. It needs something where you can allow yourself to be silly while maintaining a serious aspect as well.
Yeah.
And of course that's something that fits very well in this concept of Ritualmord and an album called This Is Not Lifelover, because it's a song that could have been Lifelover if it was still an active band. And beyond that, we can finish that theme with the actual cover art, because there are some similarities to another cover, and there are several thoughts behind that. And just like with Dit ruset tar oss, when I moved to where I live now, and I saw these fields of flowers on this mountain that looked too good to be true, and I had this idea immediately that this is so stupid that I have to do it. To make a cover similar to Pulver, but with me instead. And of course, I immediately contacted Johan about it and said, when can you come down here? Because I wouldn't be able to take these pictures properly by myself. So, yeah, maybe it's a little weird picture to ask one of your friends to take of yourself. But we have known each other for a long time, so
I can
obviously we had to do it. And as you know, it could definitely be worse. Like this is an artful picture and not just full frontal nudity, because we're making music and music videos and posters and shirts, not OnlyFans content. Like we're not making a calendar, though.
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe some other time. We'll see. We'll see what the other album takes us. And while on that theme, where does it take you?
What do you mean?
Which of the songs do you feel is connected to where we ended this other trail of thought?
It's hard to say. There are several lyrics that I think are...
Because this is more of a mix of old and new things.
Exactly.
It makes perfect sense for an album.
I think it's interesting that Stone Pop is a very old lyric.
Pretty old. Not as old as Totalitär Tomhet, but it's still pretty old. It's definitely around 10 years or so.
Because almost everything I wrote for this album, all the lyrics I wrote are... It's more or less based on very old drafts, but then it's completely rewritten to fit with...
And maybe some of it is filtered through recent emotions and...
Filtered through experience and life and whatever. It could have been very different, it could have been...
If you still lived in Gothenburg, it might have... we might have used different lyrics or
probably
not even been able to make this album, because it's a big shift, of course.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah.
But one track that I think, one lyric that I think is important is Spår. Because it's an attempt to capture, what you call it, desperation of intense feelings. Which is not something that I really have in my life nowadays, but it was a big part for me when I was younger. If I was, for instance, if I was angry or sad, I was very angry or very sad. It wasn't really like, it never went through a filter, which made emotions hard to deal with when I was younger. And that's pretty much what that track is about. Because another track that's important is the one we did a video for.
Yeah. And
that is one of those who were written quite recently. And it's more or less about destroying yourself to rebuild yourself, which is a lesson that I think both of us have learned through life several times, that sometimes you have to destroy yourself to rebuild yourself, to become worse in order to become better.
I like to make the joke with some seriousness attached to it, that it's never too late to give up.
Yeah.
But I mean that in a positive way, because like I mentioned in some posts connected to this song when we shared it, that giving up means that you enable yourself to start something new, or do something else or different. And emptiness doesn't mean nothing. An emptiness is full of something, and it's up to you to fill it with something.
Yeah.
And it's all about context and perspective, and how you look at it. So giving up doesn't have to be a definite thing.
It's not the end, it's the beginning sometimes.
Yeah, it's not as destructive as it sounds.
It's in the same way that you have to let go of some things in order to fill your life with new things.
Yeah, and some people you're not supposed to keep. You're supposed to lose some people.
Exactly.
Or some aspects of them.
Some
people are, like, you might start to know them as a friend, but they're supposed to be just an acquaintance.
And some people some people and some behaviors and some habits or whatever.
Yeah, it can be about that too.
It's important to know the difference that some things can be very important in your life for a while, but they're not supposed to be there forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another lyric that is quite interesting in that sense is Volanton, because that's very much about, it's that theme as well to some extent, but also this, how should I say it, to explore the ability to listen to yourself. Because something I didn't realize quite late in life is most of the times I know the answers. Most of the times I know things not before they happen, but if I have a question about something, I somehow know the answer already, but I don't know it in my brain, it's more I know it in my heart. And to be able to make that connection between your conscious and subconscious maybe.
And sometimes it can also be more comfortable in that moment to suppress something,
Of course, yeah.
and to just not let your thoughts go to some places, because you know that that will require and demand more energy or time of you than what you have to spare that moment.
Yeah.
So it can be kind of, it's not just self-sabotage, but it's also a way of not developing or evolving as a person, because you're imposing some rules on yourself that you know are not positive or useful. But just like with some of the themes of some of the other songs, is that just because it's destructive doesn't mean that it's just innately harmful. It can be, in the long run, you maybe need to do something destructive to open up paths that will heal you.
Sometimes you have to tear the house down in order to build a new house. Yeah, and of course there are other lyrics as well. It's not that I think that some aren't worth mentioning, it's just that I think that some are more worth to mention than others.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna
or that they are too similar, that
exactly.
we're already...
It kind of crosses over on the same theme, and yeah, if you read them you'll probably understand.
And they're also, as a whole, they are an entirety. This album is put together in this order, and we chose the track
exactly
order because this is a way that if you listen to the songs by themselves, that's fine too, but we chose this order of the songs because it makes it's more appealing, and more impactful.
I think it should be enjoyed all together and not as single tracks. But
it's the best way to really get a sense of the Ritualmord and what this album offers.
Yeah. But as long as you listen to it and enjoy it, I'm happy.
Me too. And would you say there are any places rather than moods or experiences that has inspired some of this album to you?
Yeah, Gothenburg. Very much Gothenburg. And this city on its own. I lived there for several years, for almost 10 years, until recently. And it was a very... Afterwards, it was a very good experience for me. But I don't think I enjoyed living there very much for most of the time. because it's nothing wrong with the city. It's more of a me problem. But
you have different state of mind, and it's that's the state that it's a part of or county is not your county of origin either, so you don't have the same connection to it as I have. Like
something like that. Yeah.
The area that it's a part of, or the bigger area of it, is more connected to my roots. So,
Yeah.
so I have a very different connection to dialect and the nature and everything like that.
But the nature
It was
there
nice
is-
to see you find your places in it too.
Yeah, for instance, something I loved about Gothenburg, especially where I lived towards the end, is the nature. You visited me a few times, and I showed
It's
you
a
the
really
forest.
good area.
And I spent hours almost every day exploring the woods there. Because
Yeah, it made it feel a lot less like a slum or ghetto,
Yeah.
because we have those in Sweden too.
Yeah.
People don't realize it, but that's because they haven't been outside of the city center.
But it was interesting,
Mhm.
and I don't regret moving there. But it feels good to not live there any longer, I think.
Yeah, it's understandable.
But you have to change. You have to change scenery sometimes. I think it's very.
It's very good for your self-development
Yeah.
to
Live in
have
your
a,
city.
because it's like a different culture. Like, it's the closest thing you can get to being in a different country while still being in Sweden, to be at least in a different both city and county.
Yeah.
Because if you just lived in a different suburb of Stockholm, you would still be
It's still Stockholm.
more or less in Stockholm, even if you would be like in a fancy neighborhood or in a hood. It doesn't change how you interact with the city and the different collective transportation, or even if you Uber everywhere, you're still using the network.
Yeah.
So I think it was very good that you lived somewhere that's not here and also not the south, because the south is its own thing.
Yeah, I lived in Skåne in south of Sweden for 3 years.
Yeah.
Almost 3 years, and it was also an interesting experience.
I can
Because
imagine.
At that time, I felt that I had to move from Stockholm to get perspective or something. I think I felt it was important for me to get away from here.
Yeah,
in
to
order
study in a different city and not just be
stuck
all
here.
your career
Yeah.
or development.
So
up here.
after living in Malmö, it was felt reasonable to move to Gothenburg and give it a try. But yeah, 10 years later, it was time to move back.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting choice, since it enables you to see where you came from, but from a very different perspective, because you have evolved a lot as a person from when you moved away from here.
Yeah,
So-
when I moved away from here, I was like almost still a child.
Yeah.
Not really, but I was in my early 20s, and
Mentally more than physically,
Yeah.
you were definitely.
but
You had your limitations.
yeah, we all did back then, I guess. But yeah, but it's interesting to see where you come from as when you grown from what you were when you left, or however you should put it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting for whatever release we end up embarking on after this one, since now we are at 2 new places in our lives,
Time for the next chapter.
and yeah, it's going to be interesting and see where it takes us, since we are both pretty open to the experience of sometimes letting the experience guide us and then not be too locked in on a specific goal. It's good to have one, but it's not necessary to start a journey, which I think is a very interesting way to live as an artist, to see where the path takes us.
Yeah, I think when it comes to goals, it's the same way let's say you have a goal.
Since we also achieve something very different with this album than our other
Yeah.
releases, this opens up a whole different level of what we can add to our songs that now is added to what people will expect from us compared to before. So we have our playground just grew to an arena
Yeah.
from a ball pit.
Yeah, it's quite impressive.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting.
But yeah, I think as you said, it's important to have goals. But
Yeah.
I think this, in the same way that you sort of recalibrate your strategy to achieve your goal, I think it's important to reevaluate what your goal is.
Yeah, so we're not just repeating ourselves.
Exactly, because if you have this, if you're not in the set that this is my goal,
Mhm.
then you're not open to everything else that it could be, and where you can take yourself from that goal afterwards. Because the goal is never the goal. There is always a new goal after the goal, I think.
Definitely. Cheers to that.
Cheers.